fallen, Buckinghams fallen to rise no more.
Remove Obama and God will bless.
Buckingham's fallen to rise no more.
With liberty, life, and happiness.
Buckingham's fallen to rise no more. Oh, Buckingham's fallen, Buckingham's fallen to rise no more. Oh, Buckingham's fallen, Buckingham's fallen to rise no more.
Nice to see everybody here. I just want to start by, again, welcoming everybody to this event. This is the second event, a joint event among our slate of 6 LaRouche Democrats. Last weekend we had Dave Christie, who's running for Congress in Washington State, and Summer Shields, who's running, as you know, in San Francisco against Nancy Pelosi. The two of them had a conference last weekend, and they took on really communicating what NWAPA, the NWAPA project, is, the North American Water and Power Lines, which is a keystone of this slate of 6, is a platform of the slate of 6. So that kicked it off last weekend. This is a second event with Rachel Brown, who, as you know, is running in Massachusetts against our favorite Barney Frank, and Diane Sare, who likes to be kept in a shroud of ambiguity against who exactly she's running against. There's a certain congressman in New Jersey who's just sort of asking for Diane to run against him. But I'm not going to say who that is. This event, this will be the first of many joint events. We're going to have all of the candidates together at next week's webcast, which will be a week from today. Lyndon LaRouche will be giving an international webcast. But this really has the enemy scared to death. Because, and I want to put in context exactly what this slate of 6 candidates means. Embedded in these 6 candidates, and just the idea of it, is the legacy of Franklin Roosevelt and the legacy of John F. Kennedy is embedded in this slate of 6 candidates. And this is at a time when we have an American president who calls himself a Democrat, who has worked overtime to, and excuse my language, but really piss on the legacy of these 2 presidents. And the Democratic Party understands that. The worst of the Republican Party is using that to their advantage. So what you have now as a decisive factor in this nation, and therefore in world politics, is what Lyndon LaRouche is doing, and this newly created slate of 6 candidates who have probably the most, they represent the greatest political power just in what they represent. And to the degree that we can communicate that to the American people, and that means everybody in this room can communicate that and resonate that with an American population who so desperately needs that vision, that creativity, that imagination, and not to pay lip service to something like that, because we didn't get here as a nation by paying lip service to a good idea. We acted on it. We created laws. We created a constitution. We had people who took up the challenge to represent other citizens. And my life is going to be representing other people, communicating these ideas across generations. And that's what we saw with the original 3 veteran candidates, of which Rachel Brown is one. And that's what we have now as an added power by increasing the slate to 6. So just in a period of time when our enemy, the oldest enemy the American nation has had, the British Empire, just when they thought the American people would cave, we show up. And they didn't count on a small handful of people sticking to principle. They didn't count on that. Well, they're wrong. And what it means to be coming onto the, I mean, if you just think about it, it's a little bit, think about how much the Congress is hated right now. And to say you're going to run for Congress, I mean, it's a gutsy move. So we're not. What we're doing in running for Congress is reestablishing the principle of the United States government. And that's not just one office, that's a relationship. It's not just one person, it's a relationship between a person and a population and principles. It's not one object, it's a relationship among many different things. Now, so what does it mean right now to be the living image of this legacy carved out by our founding fathers through Lincoln, through the Careys, through McKinley, to Roosevelt, to JFK, through Lyndon LaRouche? What does that mean right now? It means one heck of a political fight, because it should be clear to people, and this really has to get under your skin. If you walk out of this room feeling the same way you did as you walked in, there's a problem. You really have to let it get under your skin that we have Adolf Hitler in the White House. Adolf Hitler, Barack Obama is probably worse than Adolf Hitler, and he is the president of the United States right now. That should bother you. That's a problem. That's a real big problem. And so what does that mean for our candidates? And essentially, what does that mean for you? We've got to fight it. You can't let any other, you can't let the odds, you can't let any other boundary determine whether we win or lose this, because failure really isn't an option. That's the situation. We have an absolutely psychotic, crazy man in the White House. And we can't move forward until he is removed from office with the fourth Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. So what I want to do is just make it very clear the role of the 6 candidates and the removal of Barack Obama, and then the potential future that we have is sort of waiting for us on the other side. What I want to do is return to now a very famous date in American history, which is April 11th, 2009. Some of you know what day that was. That was the day in an international webcast that Lyndon LaRouche said about Obama, this guy is a Nero. This guy is, his psychology is that of Emperor Nero, of an Adolf Hitler, he's a narcissist. His commitment is to himself, not to the American people. It's not to you, it's to himself. Now, that was not a metaphor. That's not a metaphor, that was not a, it's kind of like this. That was the greatest political insight in this nation since that date, I can guarantee it. And that very few people took Lyndon LaRouche up for what that actually meant. And he said, at that point, he said, if you don't think in these terms, if you don't think in the terms that you have Emperor Nero in the White House, then you don't understand Obama. And we know that the Democratic Party didn't really want to hear that, because there they were trying to cut a deal with Adolf Hitler. It's not really going to work very well. Now, the other side of that is that the British had that profile on him. They have that profile on Obama, that he's committed to himself, he's not committed to the American people, and therefore, when you have a situation where you have the greatest financial meltdown in modern history, you know which side this guy is going to fall towards. They're going to have no empathy for the American people. He's not going to be the next FDR. Matter of fact, he's going to side with the side that FDR was fighting against. And that's a problem, because he's the President of the United States. He's not a Democrat. It's a big problem. So what happens? Well, here we are in the middle of the greatest financial collapse in modern history. As it stands right now, we will not survive this unless the Glass-Steagall is passed. And that hasn't been passed yet, right? So we are on schedule for a collapse of the world system. And what if you look at the way the British operate, what do they say? Okay, well let's make sure we eliminate the one chance, the one holdout outpost that might get in the way of us, potentially taking control in a situation like this. Let's really bury the United States. So what do? They have Obama in office, and they say, what we're going to do is we're going to run a healthcare program that gets people to accept genocide. This is his T4 program. And Lyndon LaRouche was way out ahead on this one, way out ahead on this one. And people wanted to call it socialist, you heard all of it. People wanted to call it everything in the book, but they didn't have the courage to call it for what it was. And it's genocide. It's exactly what Hitler did in 1939 when he wrote his healthcare program. So we said at that point, Obama gets the mustache. This mustache is staying on this man's face until he takes his program and buries it. Because this is not, cost effectiveness is not an American, we don't do business that way. We do not run this country with cost effectiveness. So we put the mustache on Obama and we said, we gotta handle this thing, we gotta do something quick. And at that point, if you remember, his administration were all of these behaviors types. You know, they were Peter Orszag, Rahm Emanuel, these crazy people we featured I think quite well on the LPAC site. And we said, okay, we got to get these guys, we got to clean them out and get Obama around the same group of people around him. We can manage this guy. That didn't happen. He didn't drop the T4 program. And what did the American people do? They reacted. They said they didn't know. They might have not known what they wanted, but they didn't want that. They didn't want to be told that they were too expensive to keep alive. Because we don't do that here. And that's actually that has been the guiding light in civilizations. We don't do that here in the United States. And so you had a real resonance among the population who got together in a way I certainly haven't seen, and probably most of you had never seen before, and they said no. They didn't say what they wanted, but they said no, and that was important. So Lyndon LaRouche is looking at this situation, and he's saying, okay, well, we need this emergence, this resonance needs leadership. And he can do what he does, which is basically acting as the de facto president of the United States. But what we need some candidates. So it's kind of obvious who was going to run against Barney Frank. Because in lockstep with Lynn, Rachel came out and confronted Barney Frank and said, you know what, this policy is a Hitlerian policy, and we're not going to let this pass. And Barney Frank said something in whatever language he speaks, and this thing went if you remember, it went all over the place. It went all over the TV networks, it went all over the internet, it was international. And that, in a certain sense, Rachel became the voice for the mass strike, but on principle. And had Lynn not been there to call it for what it is, you can kind of imagine where we would be. But Rachel stepped up to the plate. Okay, so we said we need more candidates. So we got Summer Shields in California to run against Nancy Pelosi, and we had Keisha Rogers in Texas, in the 22nd District of Texas, which is where the Johnson Space Center is. So these three now emerge on the political scene as the real Democratic Party. Because at this point, most Democrats are saying, who is this guy? I mean, I know I have to pay lip service to him, but he's not a Democrat. They wouldn't say it publicly, but they're saying it among themselves, this guy's not a Democrat. Okay, so go a little bit further down the line. After we had announced the candidacies, the 2011 budget comes out, and Obama decides to cancel funding to the Constellation program. The next chance we would get to going a manned mission back to the moon and beyond. It wasn't the greatest program, that's fine, but that's not why he canceled it. He didn't cancel it because he had a disagreement with the science of it or the design of it. He canceled it because he is run by the British, and if we were to have an ambitious manned space program, that would very easily mean the extinguishing of and the non-tolerance of their policies of globalization. So that was fun because that basically handed Keisha Rogers her victory in the primary in Texas. We won the primary in Texas in the 22nd District, the Democratic primary, on the campaign Save NASA, Impeach Obama. And what you found were that there were real Democrats in the United States who couldn't stand Obama, who really, the principal leadership of Franklin Roosevelt and what John F. Kennedy did really resonated with them, and they didn't see it represented anywhere except for what Keisha Rogers was doing, what Rachel Brown was doing, and what Summer Shields was doing. So this created a very interesting situation for the Democrats, because by the time the November 2010 November elections came to a close, Keisha Rogers, who had immediately, as soon as one person saw a picture of her with holding the Obama stash sign, the Democratic Party in Texas said, "We're not supporting you. We're cutting off all funds, all support." We were totally excited by that. We didn't need party hacks to win the election. But this is what's interesting, is that Keisha, we ended up getting 62,000 votes in the 22nd district. That's 62,000 people who said, yes, I want Obama gone. I want, NASA's got to be the forefront of this nation's economic policy. And Keisha ended up doing far better than many of the Democrats who had the full support of not just the Texas Democratic Party, but the DNC. And so this divide, this gap became increasingly larger and larger for what the Democratic Party, to the degree that they're not bucking Obama and saying, "Look, you're not a Democrat, get out of here. We're not going to call you. I mean, we're not going to support you because you're not a Democrat." To the degree that they will not do that, they're losing. They don't have the support of the American people. So, meanwhile, his mental state became more and more clear that this guy was breaking down, and his cabinet began to leave him. Everybody left. Everybody left, except for Joe Biden is still there, poor guy. But no, everybody left, and it became more and more clear that what Lynn had said, that this guy is a Nero, was true. The only problem is that people still didn't have the guts to get this guy out of there. The line was still, we can work with him. It's not that bad. That's over the top to call him Adolf Hitler. Okay, well, what happens next? Because of our push to make clear that the only way this nation would survive the financial crisis is to pass Franklin Roosevelt's 1933 Glass-Steagall. And our push to do that, two senators, Maria Campbell, who's a Democrat, and John McCain, who's a Republican, got together and said, let's pass this thing. In its original form, let's just pass this thing, and I know that if we stand up now, other people will follow. And that was the case. People in the Senate and the House got excited that these two were going to get together, bipartisan, pass this thing, because people know what the Glass-Steagall is. It's not that people don't know what it is that they're scared to death to pass it because of the implications. But what happened? At the exact same time, Britain got a hold of this news that we were about to pass the Glass-Steagall through the Senate, through the U.S. Senate. And they made it very clear, through different channels, that if we were to pass the Glass-Steagall, that would be considered an act of aggression against Great Britain. So what happened? Obama killed it. He went into the Senate and he killed it. He said, no, we're not passing this thing. We're not doing it. And a lot of the senators and a lot of the members of the House got a sense of really what Lynn was talking about. What are the implications of this? You're talking about changing the way the whole world financial system works. You're talking about changing the way the entire world functions. And this means war. This really is a war. So now we have a real big problem. This is almost a year. This is a year after Lynn had warned, get this guy under control. This is about half a year after Lynn said, impeach him. So now you have a guy who is operating under foreign interests inside the United States as our president, actually stopping the exact legislation that will stop a dark age from happening. That's the president of the United States. So it created a situation where, and we all saw this, right? The American people got more and more enraged at this guy. When the Democrats got enraged, they didn't have the guts to kick him out of their party. And the Republicans were just loving it. They were just eating it up. They were using it to their advantage. So you had a situation where, again, this impulse to really buck what was wrong. This Hitlerian figure, they knew that he was dangerous, but to the degree that there's no political leadership to use the Constitution to get them the heck out of the way and move on with the country's future, what happened? We had a 2010 election where a bunch of Republicans who know nothing about economics, well, they know a lot about fascist economics and austerity, they know nothing about American system economics, get elected into our United States Congress and become Obama's partner in crime. Just when everyone's like, we don't want Obama, we want to get him out of here, we'll vote for Republicans. Now they have a whole Congress of Obamas. That worked out real well for you. And so it's the same problem, right? It's like the little kid who learns to say no. First word he learns is no. And what do you want to do? No. Do you want to do this? No. Do you want to do that? No. It's like, oh, what do you want to do? So to the degree that the American people can learn to speak and articulate what they want and what they demand, which comes from a commitment to the future. It doesn't come from an opinion. It doesn't come from some stale academic picture of what happened in the past. It actually comes from a commitment and a real relationship to the future. And so after this election, we looked around and we said, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? The threat to the Republic is ever present. It's even stronger than it was before the election. And Obama's still in office. And we were way out ahead on this thing. We warned both the Democrats and the Republicans. If you want to have the American people's trust, you get rid of him. It's in the Constitution. It's there. Do it. And they haven't done it yet. And that's why there was a discussion, okay, yes, we're gonna run the slate of 3 candidates again. But better than that, we're gonna double it. Because the American people are ready for a future. They're ready for leadership. But it needs to be articulated. It needs to be fought for. And we need real revolutionary ideas. And if you've been following, if you're able to keep up with LaRouche, which you think it'd be easy because he's 88, it's not. It's not easy. I try, it's not easy. He has the most powerful ideas on the planet. And the source of his, I think the source of his genius is a real moral one. It's a real commitment to the future. And it's fun because this polemic he's developed with the 5 senses. If you go to the LPAC site and you read the last couple of reports that he's published, he has a real polemic about who you actually think you are is determined by your 5 senses. Well, the good news is that that's not really you. So it begs the question, it's a very provocative question, well, what are you? What are you if you're not the sum total of your 5 senses? It's a very provocative question, but what you realize is that really is answering those questions, asking those questions, you begin to move into really the domain of history. And there's just a few other individuals who've touched on this. Percy B. Shelley is one, Rosa Luxemburg is another. But there's a real physics to the way human history works. And it's funny because you begin to deal with real principles, real physical principles that you cannot see with your senses. And that's a big problem today because yes, you can talk about the Congress, you can talk about Obama, you can talk about the slate of 6 candidates, but there's another domain that you're operating in, and that's what is going on with the state of mind of the population. Where is it? How can it be guided? How can it be educated? And so to the degree that people are always hypothesizing and always just reviewing what they really think they are, what their real role in history is, then you have the potential to go somewhere. You have the potential for progress. So, and that I think is it's fun because it's seemingly the most impractical question you could ask. Like, okay, we have to get the right economic policy down. This is urgent. We have to have all these particulars straight. But none of that really makes sense unless you are always sort of asking and educating your own mind. which LaRouche gives you the opportunity to do. So that, I just wanted to give the context of the 6 candidates, because that's where we are right now. We have what you'll hear today from 2 of them, and these 2 really represent the leading edge of American politics. And as a slate, it's an incredibly powerful force. And then just what I do want to reiterate is that on the way down here, we had a chance to listen to a discussion LaRouche was having with some associates, and he is more adamant than ever that Glass-Steagall must be passed. He said, any other legislation, any other political agenda, you're kidding yourself. And what he said, and I think it's important to relay to you, is that we have a situation where if Glass-Steagall is not passed, if we do not cancel these trillions of dollars of fictitious, whatever you want to call them at this point, these toxic debts, if we do not cancel them and cancel any obligations we have to the monetary system, what you're going to have is a real breakdown in the United States where you have the potential for what happened last weekend in Arizona to just happen en masse. And you could have an American-style Jacobin revolution, a Jacobin terror here in the United States. And that's, with Obama in office, that's a very, very real possibility. So you kind of have to ask yourself, what is Glass-Steagall? What are the real implications of this thing if passing it would mean a completely different playing field? It's not just a piece of legislation. I mean, you're really talking about something principled there. And I would just encourage people here, that's got to be what determines what you do every day with your life. Because it's a principle. It's not a campaign for a little while over here or something you know a lot of details about. This is a principle. And to the degree that we treat it as anything less, we're really not going to be that effective. So it's an interesting time because we get to be incredibly creative in how we flank the situation, and we flank the Congress who doesn't have any guts. And don't let anything get in your way, because as they say in Texas, as they say at NASA, failure is not an option because our lives and our future depend on it. So with that said, I would like to introduce Rachel Brown, who is part of one of the best flanks we've got now in passing Glass-Steagall, creating a future for the United States.
All right, a lot of good people here. So, our economy has gone beyond belief. Beyond belief. Anybody that's not talking about the complete disintegration of the entire financial system in a way never seen before in human history is out of their minds. They're not acknowledging the obvious, plain truth. I mean, Alicia brought up the question of the senses. I mean, even our senses are telling us this thing is finished. So there's some disconnect going on between people's brains and what they're actually seeing going on around them. So that's really what our slate of 6 candidates represents, is we represent that clear voice of sanity, pointing out the inevitable collapse, the inevitable unbelievable doom that will occur if we do not choose to change our policies in swift time. Because the situation now in the U.S. economy, in the world economy, is in a complete disintegration process. This is something Lyndon LaRouche has been warning about since the 1980s and earlier. This is something he has been pointing out as an inevitable result of the nature of our economy. And now it's happening at an increasing speed, day by day, week by week. So every moment that goes by that we choose not to enact Glass-Steagall and not to rebuild our physical economy through NWAPA is a day further into insanity. So let me just detail some of this. I mean, people are already seeing it. You know, as you're watching the news and things like that, you're watching it and saying, this makes no sense. This makes no sense. Wait, I'm reading another article. That makes no sense, right? Nothing which is being talked about right now makes any sense. As Alicia brought up, you know, people got angry. They voted out the Democrats and they brought in Republicans. Well, now people are confused because the Republicans are saying the same thing that Obama's saying. That doesn't make sense. And then the Republicans are mad at Obama, but in reality, they actually want to do the same thing as him. And they're not quite sure why that doesn't make sense. Some of them are. Some of them don't agree. So, you know, some of them realize, look, neither side is really presenting a solution once you put it like that. Once you point out that there is a higher solution which has nothing to do with pointing your finger at somebody. Because that's the level of dialogue which is really being pushed in the media and in, you know, political rhetoric is really the idea of who can we blame? What part of the population? What part of the Congress? What party? Who is it? Who can we blame? And what we're pointing out is two things. One is that there's a higher enemy, which is out destroying nation states across the world. You know, you're seeing the same policy happen in Europe, around Ireland, Greece, Spain, the attack on the sovereignty of these nations in Europe, as well as the attack on the sovereignty of the United States. And that's, you know, this form of the British Empire as through the inner alpha financial system, as through the role of Wall Street and London speculators who are telling cities, states, and national governments, you got to do what we tell you or else. You're not getting any more money from us. You know, well, so what? What if we don't get any more money from them? You know, there's something else we can do. We can tell them to, you know, we can tell them to take a hike if we want to. That's what Glass-Steagall is, and that's what we have to do. But yeah, the larger point I was bringing up, one is that there's a higher enemy. We've got to direct people's attention towards that, and the real distinction of the enemy coheres with the difference between a monetary economy and a real economy, a physical economy, based off of, you know, increasing rates of production, higher levels of thinking in your population, more productive citizens. We need to bring back a useful citizenry. You remember that idea where people used to do something that was useful, you know, whether it was a different trade or something like that. You know, people were useful to society, and they felt bad if they weren't, right? Well, that's what we can actually bring back, because people are happier when they are being useful and productive, and that's what we're made to do. As Nicholas of Cusa put it, as birds were made to sing, humans were made to think and hypothesize. So if we're not being put in a condition where we're able to do that, people are going to be upset. They're not going to be happy. And that's what you see when you have this situation that happened last weekend in Arizona with Loeffner. Is that, yeah, you know, yes, this guy was disturbed. You know, as LaRouche pointed out, this wasn't a result of political rhetoric. This kid was probably a schizophrenic, an untreated schizophrenic. But what many young people that we've spoken with have said is, I know a lot of people like that. I know a lot of people that I think could fly off the handle. Because our youth generation has no sense of their identity. They have no connection to the past, the future, or really even the present. I mean, that's what this kid showed, right? He had no relationship even to the present. And so he'd make these little, you know, these grammar rules and things, which sort of gave him a structure of thought. You know, in one sense, he was imposing a structure of thought on the universe. Even though it was artificial and crazy, he was creating an order in his mind for the universe to correspond to. But as people see, I mean, our youth generation is really, really in trouble. And that's also what we've got to change through giving a mission back to our nation. And this is what people want to see. This is what people are sitting there waiting for. They're waiting for the policy to come in that's going to turn things around. And that's what our 6 candidates are doing, and that's what NWAPA will do. NWAPA, as Diane's going to speak about more later, NWAPA will revive that program for our economy of not only creating 4 to 6 to 10 million jobs in short time, high-skilled jobs. This will give our youth a sense that they can participate in something that's beyond their lifetime. That's good, and it's going to make their life mean something, and it's going to be them giving something to future generations. That's something they don't see anymore. So all we see is this idea of the market system. And so now, cities and states and national economies are graded on their saleability of their bonds and things like this, right? The value of a nation's economy, the ability of a city or state to generate funds, is based on their ability to borrow money from Wall Street, from London, from banks like Deutsche Bank, the Citigroup, Royal Bank of Scotland. These bond traders and these investors, if they don't want to buy your bonds that you issue as a nation or a city, well, you're bankrupt. You're a worthless economy. Well, why would economy be determined by the interest of some Wall Street speculators who are parasites, and whether they want to buy some pieces of paper that you issue? Why should this be a notion of economic value? So our thinking is backward, because as any student of LaRouche's physical economics knows, value comes from the increase of productive power in your society. And so this is also the notion that our nation was uniquely founded on. This is the notion of Alexander Hamilton's idea of credit. And what Hamilton said is something that's very controversial today, but it's something we've got to get in people's heads. He said, "You're only bankrupt if you believe you're bankrupt." And what he meant by that was not, you can find somewhere to get some money or something like that, but that the economic value, that money comes secondary to the increase of your productivity as a nation, of which, constitutionally, we have the power to issue credit in order to increase those productive powers, to multiply the manufacturers. He said specifically, we need manufacturers because that's a multiplier effect. The amount of people that are going to be usefully employed and the ability of people to be creative in a manufacturer-based society is different than in an agricultural-based society. We have more freedom to be creative. We have higher rates of increase of energy flux density, of efficiency of mechanical processes within a manufacturer-based economy. Well, so now we can apply that similar type of thinking to, really what Lynn's saying with NWAPA, we need to transcend to a higher way of thinking about economy as our relationship to the physical structure of the planet itself, the chemical structure of the planet, the organization of the water systems of the planet, organizations of the deserts, which don't actually have to be there. There's really no reason for a desert really to exist. It's not. They spread and they diminish. It's not like we should leave deserts there forever. They're not really useful. So what we're going to do is we're going to reorganize how things are laid out on the planet. We're going to organize them so that they work better. That's going to be a new notion of economy. That's a new way of thinking as humanity. It's not simply the trading of stuff or even the manufacturers of stuff, but it's how are we scientifically applying our minds to organize the physical universe to work better. And then we can even go on beyond that relationship of Earth and mankind organizing the planet, and then we could think about organizing other things in the universe too. But that's for later. But as Alicia started with, this is a real key point to emphasize, is the fact that these cuts are very, very fascist. And this is a full-on Hitler policy that Obama is pushing. Because as I mentioned, with Glass-Steagall, for one, there's no reason to do it. The debts that the states or the nation is paying off right now are illegitimate. It's based off of gambling debts. There's no reason to pay this stuff back. So saying, well, look, we've got to cut our Medicaid, our Social Security, our Medicare, in order to pay back these debts, that's someone's obviously lying, right? They're lying because there's no reason to pay this stuff back. And for one example, what you saw with this decision in Massachusetts recently was that they ruled on this foreclosure gate situation that the banks can't prove that they own these mortgages. So therefore they said, well, these mortgages are null and void if you can't prove you own them. Right? Well, that's the nature of the whole system. So that's the type of decision that a city, a state can take at any moment. They can point out the flaws in the system, say because of this is an illegitimate contract, I have no duty to pay it back. That's an American policy. That's essentially what Roosevelt did with the Glass-Steagall policy, is he separated out the legitimate interests of the commercial banking system, which lend to agriculture, businesses, and things like that. And he separated it from the House of Morgan and the investment banks, which said specifically, they said, we don't want federal protection because we don't want to follow your rules. Well, why didn't they want to? Because they want to screw people. And they still do today. So it's a matter, we got to separate out the men from the boys here. We got to stand up and say we're not going to let you make these decisions for us any longer. So this is what's happening on the state level, because these cuts are really being cut to the bone right now. What's happening in Arizona with the Medicaid cuts, I don't know if people heard about the situation there, where it really begins to indicate the true nature of this policy as a Hitler policy. In Arizona, they have a Republican governor, and they made cuts to Medicaid transplants, where 7 types of transplants were outruled and said, we're not going to pay for these any longer. So for one, some people that were on the list to get transplants are now being denied, right? So they thought they were going to live, now they're being told they're going to die. Okay? People that didn't do anything wrong, they're not old, they're not that means, but there's even, I'll finish the idea. Well, yeah. What I mean with that idea is that where does this process of thought stop? Because that was the idea of the useless eaters. Is first they can say, well, it's the useless eaters, we're not going to pay for them, right? The elderly, the chronically ill, and the mentally ill or something. They're not useful. There's no hope of them getting better, so we're not going to waste the funds. That's one step, right? That is the first step, the useless eaters. Then the second step, we're starting to see in these states too. These people can get better. They are curable, but we're saying it's too expensive. We don't even have excuses to say, well, this person's not going to live with the treatment. We're just saying we simply don't have the money, right? That's what's being done with these Medicaid cuts. These are people that are, everybody should be given health care, but now they're just simply cutting off people that can't afford health care. Saying we don't have enough funds. And that's what the governor of this state is saying, right? That's what the new governor of California is saying, Jerry Brown. They came in and was supposed to be the complete opposite of Arnold Schwarzenegger. The Democrats have been complaining about Schwarzenegger for 8 years, or maybe was it 6 years? He didn't come in the beginning, right? They've been complaining about him all this time. We can't do what we want because of this horrible governor, right? We get in this Democratic governor, Jerry Brown. He does the same thing. He says, I'm sorry, I know it's painful, but we have to make the cuts. Practically quoting Arnold Schwarzenegger. And this is what pretty much every governor is saying. Even Governor Cuomo of New York is saying he has to cut Medicaid. They're just saying we have to do it. right? And so this is a Hitler policy. It does not have to be done. It is a willful, intentionally willful, because anyone can realize that this is not going to work. As you follow out this process of thought, anyone can see this isn't going to work. So it's essentially a knowingly killing the people you're supposed to be defending, supposed to be protecting.
Genocide.
Yeah, so this is simply not allowable. And what's going on also with this process is, okay, so you're making the cuts. You're saying, okay, I'm being a good governor. I'm following the rules. I'm being a good leader. I'm making the cuts. Now, our economy is going to get better.
Yeah.
5 years down the road, when this recovery happens that people are talking about, things are going to get better, right? But we just put out an article recently about California. For example, California, since 2008, has had $100 billion of deficit to deal with. And they've cut it with $45 billion in cuts, cutting very needed social programs, healthcare for children, elderly nursing home programs, things like this. These have been cut. They also raise taxes, and they're deferring debt to future budgets. They've followed all the rules. They're trying to cut, they're trying to trim, they're taxing their people, right? Still, California's debt is still growing. And what happens as your unemployment rises? What happens as these cuts are made? You have more people on unemployment, right? That's another expenditure. You have more people on Medicaid, right? That's another expenditure. So now these people that had health care, now they don't have health care. They're going to be having illnesses untreated, which turns out more expensive for your hospitals when people turn up at the emergency room and things like this. So this is actually a bankrupting process itself. You have less tax revenue as your employment shuts down. Your commercial real estate situation is dropping, as well as the residential real estate. Less tax revenue for the states. And as you can look at the world's financial system, this is systemic. The amount of debt that's out there in the global financial system in the form of these derivative obligations is at least $1.4 quadrillion. So even if you tried to take every nation in the world, every central bank in the world, and pay off the debt, you couldn't do it, no matter what. So you'd have to slash every budget as much as you can. You couldn't even dent the thing, right? So that's why the only way to actually restore sovereignty to these nations is through the Glass-Steagall measure, because this will cut off these debts. And this will also at the same time make the distinction really in a principle of economy from one that's based off of monetary interests to one that's based off of the physical process of improvement of your society. Because that's what's represented, as Roosevelt showed, that's what's represented by the commercial banks. And the commercial banks, as well as the states, their real revenue, the health of their economy is dependent on the productive economy. Banks, that's really how they should make money, is through their investment into productive business enterprises or industrial enterprises in your society, or maybe investing in new scientific corporations that are going to make new discoveries. That's really where the profit of a banking sector is supposed to come. And likewise with a state budget, that it really prospers when you have a healthy economy. So the fact is that we've shut down our production, we've allowed this to happen, and people accepted it. They tried to get in on the game of these financial practices. And so now all the states and the cities, they're invested in the system as much as anybody else. Their pension funds, their bonds, municipal bonds, are in deep trouble because everybody invested in this thing. So the system is rotten the entire way through. And There's discussion about Glass-Steagall now in Congress. But I think, as I brought up, I think the idea has to come in the power of the decision to be made at any point. The power of the decision of going with Glass-Steagall, which can be made at any point by the United States, will instantly destroy the authority and the power of the British Empire and the inter-alpha banking system. The very moment this is applied, all of these contracts, all of this system loses its credibility. Because it has no credibility whatsoever, except for the fact that governments are allowing themselves to buy into it and to defend it. The moment you do that, it's finished. The moment you do that, you start constructing the WAPA, there's nothing they can do. Build an alliance with Canada, with Russia, with Mexico, build the four-power concept, and the interests of this financial system, this imperial system, are gone. Their power is gone. And so, as I brought up, it can also begin with the city, with the state. This could begin with a couple states saying we're not going to honor these debts. We're not going to pay back these contracts at any moment. And likewise with the removal of the president. That too can happen at any moment. And this is the thing. Obama is a fascist. Obama will push these policies. We saw this with his Medicare policy, with the provision 1233, which was taken out of the congressional health care bill. But he inserted it back himself under executive order into Medicare, into the regulations of Medicare themselves. So this guy will not listen to anybody, no matter who's in Congress, and that's why he's got to be removed. Now the real question is, okay, well, since we recognize that this system is dead, let's look at the real process of human economy in the universe. Let's look at the realm of human interaction and human thought, and see where does the truth of the solution lie? Where does the truth of a healthy society lie? Where does real value come from? And so, with that, I will pass it on to Diane Sare.
What you know from myself, and if you've talked to some of our organizers, is that the reason why LaRouche said that we were running this slate of 6 candidates and why he's doing what he's doing, which is acting president. I mean, I have to say Obama is going to give a so-called State of the Union address. Obama's State of the Union address will be like a Nuremberg rally after people decided they didn't like Hitler anymore. So whatever that would look like, that's going to be Obama's State of the Union address. At any rate, the reason why the 6 of us are running this campaign is because there is no leadership, and our function is to be the actual Congress. That is, you should think of the 6 of us as your representatives. That we know that last year we lost the Glass-Steagall fight by 1 stinking vote last May. Now, if there were leadership in the Senate, we would not have lost that fight. If people in the Congress had a sense in their gut of what was the importance of this, they wouldn't have let it go. So our job as a steering committee is that we function as if we are in the Congress, even though we don't officially have seats. And we're mobilizing the state legislatures to restore the relationship between the legislatures and the House of Representatives, so that Rachel is responsible. She's running in Massachusetts, but she's really a congresswoman from about 6 or 7 states in New England. And I'm running in New Jersey, but I'm responsible for at least New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. And we're sort of sharing New York and Connecticut, I would say. But this is the history of, and LaRouche is the acting president by default, because we don't have a president, we have a lunatic. This is the nature of the United States. And what I'd like you to think about are the following leaders of our republic. some of whom, that's George Washington, you recognize him, Benjamin Franklin, who was also a scientist and inventor, Harriet Tubman, people know, and I had referenced something she did once in one of my statements early on, which I don't know if people know, but on the Underground Railroad, it would have been an absolute disaster if anybody ever got caught. So that once you decided to go with her to get your freedom, you stayed with the program, and she carried a gun. And the gun was for anyone who changed their mind. Okay? Because this was not going to be messed up. She was not a liberal. And she became a spy for the Union Army. Okay, next. Okay, Abraham Lincoln, people know. Franklin Roosevelt. And here is Martin Luther King. That a lot of American leaders have changed history from outside of an official post. And that is what's embedded in the founding of our nation. We don't have kings, we don't have queens, we don't have nobility. We have a government which responds to the population and to the principle of leadership. And since today is actually the birthday of Martin Luther King, I wanted to say a few words about that. I have a feeling that a lot of people today don't really want to think that much about Martin Luther King because they partly blame him for the fact that Obama got into the White House. But unlike Obama, we know for sure that Martin Luther King was born in the United States. And unlike Obama, we know that Martin Luther King relied very, very heavily on his understanding of the founding of the Republic. And he was a champion for justice of all people, no matter how unpopular it was. And I must say, I was somewhat great. I was struck. Recently, this past week, I've been listening to a bunch of his speeches, and he was born in 1929, so he's 7 years younger than Lyndon LaRouche, or he would be if he were here. 1955, December 1st, was the day that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus to a younger white man, and she was tired, and she was an upstanding citizen. And King, therefore, would have been only 26 years old. And I had a minister friend who told me that the reason why King ended up heading the Montgomery Improvement Association was because he was the newest minister in the Ministerial Alliance, and they all had a vote and no one wanted the job. And he got it. But I don't think that's entirely true. I think that obviously there was a spark of leadership that people recognized. So this 26-year-old man was handed the unbelievable job of addressing an injustice which was totally embedded in the culture. I mean, you have to think about what would you do if you were in that situation. What was the law enforcement was against you, the culture was against you, society is against you. You're 26 years old, and you're going to do something about this. So, at any rate, obviously he was an incredible leader. And what I wanted to do is to just, in a minute here, listen to the last speech that King gave before he was assassinated, because it gets at a number of things. Most obviously is the question of immortality, because he knew that he was a target, and he knew on his way to the strike in Nashville, which is where he was speaking, or Memphis, in Memphis, that he had gotten all these threats on the way there. So it was very, very tangible that he knew that his life was in danger and likely to be ended. And you can see from this little segment of his speech the way that he dealt with that.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life, longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So the other thing that this raises as a question is not simply the question of immortality, but LaRouche keeps talking about the senses, the senses, the senses. Well, so what is King talking about? I've been to the mountaintop and I have seen the promised land. Well, what kind of sight is that? What are his eyes? And the question of the glory of the Lord. Well, people think they have an understanding of it, but if someone said, can you tell us what that looks like? What color is it? Is it a square? But it's clear there's a profound idea. And I was thinking about this in the context also of the Arizona shootings, that when I was an exchange student in Sweden, I lived in a host family. My parents were not producers. My parents my mother's deceased. My father is still a practicing psychiatrist. My mother was a scientist. My host father in Sweden was a construction foreman who built roads. And when we went through there, he had designed this very difficult pass through some mountains on the way between Sweden and Norway. And we took a trip on this road, which is a very, difficult road. And you can imagine designing the thing was somewhat of a challenge. And there was such a sense of pride about doing this and knowing that this was something that goes beyond his life, that this road is going to benefit people for maybe centuries to come. So that's the kind of thing that we want to discuss. And I was thinking of this from the standpoint of the question of this, the Brooklyn Bridge. That was built in 1883. And John Roebling, who designed the bridge, died in the middle of its construction in a tragic accident. And I think he probably was not unhappy when he died, because he knew that his wife was going to see to it that the bridge was completed. And his wife did that with his son, and so he died a happy man, knowing that he had contributed something which was a remarkable breakthrough. I believe the Brooklyn Bridge to this day is actually one of the safest, most well-constructed bridges in the Manhattan area, and it was built in 1883. So you can imagine if the nation were committed to projects like this, to a future orientation like this, what would 18 and 20-year-olds be wanting to do with their life? This is from the Tennessee Valley Authority. Think about what Franklin Roosevelt did with the CCC. And here is NWAPA, the North American Water and Power Alliance. So my contention and LaRouche's is that the construction of NWAPA is actually part of the natural course of the development of the solar system. That unlike the environmentalists, human beings are not a cancerous tumor on the planet. And in fact, we are a necessary participant in the unfolding of the creation and the development of the universe. So I'm going to start, you'll forgive me, and my presentation isn't going to be a century, but we're going to start 4.5 billion years ago with the sun. Now you can see that someone pointed out that this isn't 4.5 billion years ago because the picture was taken in 2005. But anyway, and the sun 4.5 billion years ago was different looking because it was young. We're middle-aged. Our sun is now middle-aged. But at any rate, billions of years ago, the sun was a lonely sun, and it was spinning in the universe. And what happened, as far as we can tell, is it spun, and the planets spun off of the sun, and they fell into these very fascinating orbits. They were not random, like a Jackson Pollock painting. That's not what our universe looks like. But actually, they have a remarkably perfect order, which the great scientist Johannes Kepler dedicated his entire life in the middle of the 30 Years' War to working on. And this model was one of his early models, which is the solar system. And what you see are these shapes. These are the platonic solids, because they only knew of, I think, 6 planets at the time. And they couldn't figure out what was the relationship between the distances of the orbits from each other. And what Kepler figured out is you actually could have almost perfectly nested platonic solids, and it gave you where the planets were. And not only that, it told you that there actually should be something between Mars and Jupiter. And later, many years later, they discovered the asteroid belt. But this was Kepler's hypothesis, and it was such a perfect model that these are the musical intervals of the planets. And this is the relationship between their slowest and fastest points, closest and most distant from the sun, that you actually have the harmonic intervals generated by the orbit of the planets corresponds with the musical intervals that human beings hear. So clearly, the universe is becoming more and more ordered. There's nothing random about this. Now, what I wanted to look at is a little video, which is very quick. It goes by quick, so you have to pay attention. And it's about a further development of the planet, the question of, here it is, bog iron. And you have these little green one-celled creatures that are consuming something in the ocean, and they basically consume, and they have an overpopulation problem, and they die. And where they die is the red. You get iron. That's what the traces of these little one-celled creatures. And these iron deposits, you recognize that, became very, very rich sources of bog iron for ironworks that were first created in the United States and used to develop. Of course, the railroads did not, human beings did the railroads. But that's what I'm talking about. It's part of the natural development of the universe. So rather than what Isaac Newton would say, or what people are taught in their stupid science classes in school, which is that there's a law of entropy and the universe is naturally unraveling and things are naturally winding down, it's not actually true. And here is a chart, which I don't entirely like, but it's you get the idea, which is on the left side you have seaweed, leafy plants, then you get to the exoskeletons. And this is all through time. This is all becoming more and more developed through time. The exoskeletons, then you have insects and arachnids like spiders, amphibians, fish, and then you get to mammals. And it's a little bit more complex. It's not just a linear thing. This is the pathway of our solar system in the galaxy. That green line, that little bobbing up and down, is our solar system bobbing in and out of the galaxy. And contrary to the idea that exhaling carbon dioxide is what affects the climate and weather patterns, this gigantic process has a far greater effect on everything. And if you look at the next slide, what this is the red line is cosmic radiation. The blue line is species diversity. Isn't this amazing? So that the more cosmic radiation hitting the planet, the more species that you have. And then when you get less cosmic radiation, lo and behold, all these species go extinct. Now, Al Gore would say that we're making them all go extinct, but I will submit, I don't think anyone in this room, or even all of us combined, could have the same amount of power as our solar system bobbing in and out of the galaxy, which is a much bigger process. So these are the factors affecting the development of the universe. And this is what, as human beings, we are supposed to be gaining an understanding of and an insight. So the idea is that you have less order, and the system develops to more order, more energy density. A protein is much more dense, energy dense in a plant. So you have more energy density, more order, and that's a natural process. So at this point, you might say, okay, so what happens 4.5 billion years from now when the sun expands to 250 times its current size, sucks in the planet, and we all get burned up? What's the order in that? Well, that has this little man. Now, this is a little man who got stuck in a flood. He's sitting on his roof, and the water is rising. And what happens is some guy comes by holding a log, and he says, look, I've got this log, I can get you off the roof, we can get to safety. And the man says, no, I'm waiting, the Lord is going to save me. So he waits. The next thing that happens is a guy comes by in a rowboat, and he says, get in the boat and we'll take you to safety. And the man says, no, the Lord told me he's going to save me. So he sits. Finally, the water is like up to, he's just sitting on that little teensy point on the top, and a helicopter comes and they drop a cord down to him, and they say, come on, you gotta get on, you're gonna drown. He says, no, the Lord said he would save me. I'm waiting, I trust in the Lord. I said, all right. So what happens? The water goes over his head and he drowns. And he gets up to heaven, and God says, he says to God, you know, what happened? I thought you were going to save me. And God said, I did. I sent you the stick, I sent you the boat, and I sent you the helicopter. So my point is that we should not be here. We shouldn't be stuck in our solar system 4.5 billion years from now. We should have figured out how to get into the rest of the solar system and the galaxy. We should not be like this little man. And that is the first phase. Nawab is the first phase of this journey. Now, what we're going to look at is a quick overview of it's very quick, of the project, or just the conceptual idea.
Every year, beginning in the fall and continuing through the winter, a vast migration of water takes place over the Pacific Ocean, moving over the North American continent and depositing itself as rain and snow. The majority of this precipitation falls within a thin strip of sparsely populated land, stretching from southeastern Alaska, through Canada's Yukon Territory, down to the northern tip of California. Alternately, a much larger swath of arid desert and semi-desert land spreads across much of the continent. A good portion of the heavy precipitation falling in the wet northwestern corridor makes its way into rivers, which drain into the Pacific and Arctic Oceans. In fact, the flow of freshwater runoff in Alaska alone represents more than half of the total runoff of the entire continental United States. Why let this water go to waste? Under NWAPA, this excess water would be made available for use by plant, animal, and human life, as it would be drawn into new biospheric cycles, which are made more productive through the application of human ingenuity. Beginning near the Alaskan and Canadian Yukon border, some 20% of the river runoff will be diverted into a continental water management system that gives new meaning to the concept of infrastructure. Nawapa will bring life to the vast arid regions of the continent, as well as stabilize the water supply in the Great Lakes and the eastern United States. The fresh water brought in from the north will make the great American desert bloom and catalyze new cycles of evaporation and precipitation across the continent, increasing the potential for both plant and animal life, as well as human development on a grand scale.
This is a map of the population density of the United States. Now, New Jersey has about 1,200 people per square mile, and anyone who lives in New Jersey will notice that we still have farmland, we still have trees. Other than Washington, D.C., which is a compact area where you have 9,000 people per square mile, New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the United States. Yeah. And then Massachusetts has about 885 people per square mile. And just as a comparison, Idaho, which will be the hub of this project, 19 plus. Idaho has 19 people per square mile. So what you see is the population centers along the coastline as far as we got with the river and canal system. Then you have this gigantic mountains and desert, and there's virtually nobody living there. Okay, now here we go. These are the Sawtooth Mountains. This is where the main reservoir for Nawapa will be in Idaho. The Sawtooth Mountains.
What state?
Idaho. And what's going to be required, because the water as it comes into Idaho is not going to be up at the level of the mountains. You're going to have to pump it up another 2,450 feet when you get there. So in order to do that, you're going to require 65 of these little 400 megawatt modular nuclear power plants. And those are going to be built in Idaho. Now, obviously, a state with 19 people per square mile is going to have a very hard time building these things unless you build rail, you build new cities, you take these kids who are stuck in the cities who are turning into the new Jared Loughner, and you get them out there and put them under training of maybe some of the veterans who are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and we build these things. And the supplies, the machinery, we're not going to start from scratch and just build all kinds of factories in Idaho. But if you look at where Rachel is, myself, and Bill Roberts, who's in Detroit, we represent a sort of an industrial triangle. So New Jersey, Long Island, down to Baltimore, up to Massachusetts, will be the producers of all kinds of machinery and advanced material that they need to build these things in Idaho. And you can see what's delightful about the map is, isn't it the case that the main corridors of the water are going to be exactly the parts of the United States that have not yet been developed. So we're exactly developing the part of the country that has not yet reached its potential. And I wouldn't say we've reached our potential either. I don't think New Jersey is overcrowded. So what's required? 80,000 million cubic yards of concrete, about 100 million tons of steel, tens of millions of tons of copper and aluminum, and then all kinds of new machinery for power plants and for pumping stations. And we estimate once you add in the nuclear power plants plus Nawapa, the whole thing will require about 5.5 million workers. To give you a sense of the magnitude of this, if you look at the picture here, this is Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam. Lake Mead holds 38 million acre-feet of water. Nawapa as a whole will hold between the different reservoirs, 4.3 billion acre-feet of water. Okay, it's like an order of magnitude. It's going to take 5 years to construct the rail lines just to get the supplies to the places that we need to get them. So we're going to have 5 years of massive rail building. One logical extension of this thing is going to be the Bering Strait Tunnel, which you see here between Alaska and Asia, because obviously If we're gearing up the U.S., we're developing Alaska. What you have in Siberia is an extremely rich area of raw materials. And that hasn't really been conquered yet. It's very, very difficult climate. So you can think about this. If we're going to get into outer space, if we're going to plan that in a few billion years from now, we're all going to be able to safely get off the planet before the sun blows up, then you want to make sure that you can terraform the other places that you're going. So you have to take on the very most difficult terrain in the United States, which means the extremes. You take on the deserts and you take on the extremely cold situations, and you develop those, and that prepares you for thinking about going into more hostile environments. Now in China, they're actually building right now a total of 9,000 miles of high-speed trains. Some maglev, most of them are with wheels, but high speed. And I have to say, when they say high speed in China, because we are so backwards in the United States right now, you say high speed in the United States and people think you mean 90 miles an hour. In China and most of the rest of the world, when you say high-speed rail, you mean 220 miles an hour. That's the speed of these trains. Okay, so you're going from New York to Washington in an hour on a train. That's what would be normal. Okay, we don't have an inch. For anyone who tells you right now there is not an inch of high-speed rail in the United States. Not this much. Okay, so this obviously has to be addressed. And what I wanted to share with you on this question is that LaRouchePAC, and we are very, very close. People should know that the minute we get Glass-Steagall through the Congress, what we're putting together is a builders committee for NWAPA, who are designing this program from beginning to end. This is Wayne Volz. He is you see, land development project manager. He's a builder. He has a conception of a flow chart, which you can see now, of what's the order, what's the planning phase of building something like this. So you see here the two teams. It's the Army Corps of Engineers and the Canadian military engineers. Control systems, control-based systems providers, communications, finance and accounting, right? He knows what you have to deal with to do this stuff. Then data teams, because you have to research everywhere you're going. What happens when you build a tunnel? What happens when you move a river? What happens? These things all have to be studied. A lot of this work has been done already. So geological, hydrological survey, etc. And then material production systems, machinery production, supply lines in terms of railroads, land acquisition. Some cases, like when the Three Gorges Dam was built, they had to move towns, they had to move cities out of the way. There'll be some of that involved in this, I'm sure, although you can see there were virtually no people living in the areas where we want to build most of this. Dams, tunnels. So he's working on putting together the framework for the direction, the path of the whole project. And this is Howard Chang, who, if you have been on our website, is absolutely delightful, very optimistic engineer. And he was critical. He did one of only 3 feasibility studies for the Three Gorges Dam in China. And what happened was there was a dispute because I think it was the Chinese Academy of Sciences had done a study where they decided that it wasn't going to work. It wouldn't work. Does that sound familiar? How many times have we heard that? It won't work, it won't work, it won't work. So they said, you can't do it because of the sediment. You're going to build up all this sedimentation and it's just going to fill up and it's not going to work. And what he was able to show using computer model, but obviously based on research, was that what would happen when the Three Gorges Dam was built is that you'd get a certain amount of sedimentation, but then you'd get to equilibrium, and that the water would flow through and carry the sediment and that the thing would work. So based on his study, the Three Gorges Dam was a go, and they built it and it's working. So that's what I mean, that this thing, what we represent as a slate of candidates will be part of a team to organize the government around these policies. In other words, we're going to pull the scientists together with the political community to make this thing move. And that's the idea. But as both Rachel and Alicia stressed, the first step of doing anything absolutely anything, is what I challenged Governor Christie to join me on, which he didn't accept, which is to get Glass-Steagall. So that's what I have. Thank you.